The doctor said she had weeks, maybe months, left to live. And on Christmas Eve, she was sitting alone. The old woman's hands shook as she stared at the empty chair across from her. Outside the restaurant window, snow fell softly, like heaven was whispering goodbye. Inside, laughter filled the room. Families hugged. Children tore open gifts. Glasses clinked. Love was everywhere. Everywhere except her table. Then something happened that made the entire restaurant go silent. A small girl broke away from her mother, walked straight up to the billionaire's table, looked her in the eyes, and said 7 words that would change 3 lives forever. Nobody should ever be alone on Christmas. What happened next would shock everyone in that room. But before we go any further, backhand index pointing right, where are you watching from right now? Backhand index pointing right. Has a stranger ever changed your life? Tell us in the comments and subscribe to this channel to support our growth, because this story will stay with you long after the video ends. She was known once. Feared, respected, admired. Now she was invisible. Her name was Deborah Hale. At 70 years old, Deborah had everything money could buy, and nothing it could not. She sat in a motorized wheelchair at the far corner of the Silver Cedar, the most expensive restaurant in Seattle. Her black dress cost more than most people's monthly rent. Diamonds sparkled on her thin fingers. Her hair was white and neatly pinned back. Her plate of salmon had gone cold. She hadn't touched it in over 20 minutes. Around her, life was happening. A father lifted his son so he could reach the star on a Christmas tree. A mother wiped gravy from her daughter's face, laughing. Couples leaned toward each other, whispering secrets meant only for love. Deborah watched them like someone watching a movie she would never be part of again. 5 years ago, she had not been alone. 5 years ago, she had a husband, Jacob Hale. They had been driving home from a charity gala. Deborah remembered the sound of rain on the windshield. Jacob laughing at a silly joke. Her head turned toward him for just 1 second. That was all it took. A drunk driver ran the red light. Jacob died instantly. Deborah lived. But she never walked again. In one night, she lost her husband, and her legs, and slowly, without realizing it, her family. Her daughter, Rebecca, lived in London now. Married. Busy. Always busy. Deborah's phone sat beside her plate, silent. Earlier that morning, Rebecca had sent a message. Merry Christmas, Mom. Sorry we can't make it again. Love you. Again. Same words. 3rd year in a row. A tear slid down Deborah's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. Pathetic, she thought. A billionaire crying in public. That was when a small voice spoke. Excuse me, ma'am? Deborah looked up, startled. Standing beside her table was a little girl, no more than 7 years old. She had big brown eyes and 2 messy ponytails tied with red ribbons. Her pink sweater showed a reindeer missing 1 antler. It was old. What? Are you okay? The girl asked. Deborah forced a smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. The girl frowned. You're not fine, she said simply. You're crying. Before Deborah could answer, a woman rushed over. Ruth, the woman whispered urgently. I told you to stay in the back. The woman was in her early 30s, wearing a waitress uniform. Her name tag read Sarah. Her face looked tired, the kind of tired sleep doesn't fix. But her eyes were gentle. I'm so sorry, Sarah said to Deborah. She shouldn't bother you. It's all right, Deborah said softly. She's not bothering me. But Ruth wasn't listening. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something wrapped in napkins. Carefully, like it was fragile, she placed it on Deborah's table. I made this for my mommy, Ruth said. But I think you need it more. Deborah's hands trembled as she unwrapped it. It was a drawing. Crayon on the back of a paper placemat. 3 stick figures holding hands. 1 tall, 1 small, and 1 faded in the middle. At the bottom, in crooked letters, it read, Family is love. Merry Christmas, Ruth added. Something inside Deborah cracked. The middle one is my daddy, Ruth said quietly. He died. But Mommy says he still loves us. Deborah looked up at Sarah. She saw the same grief she carried every day. I'm so sorry, Deborah whispered. Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. Thank you. Come on, Ruth, Sarah said gently. Let's go. But Ruth crossed her arms. She's all alone, Ruth said. And nobody should eat alone on Christmas. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Deborah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Oh, would you sit with me? Deborah asked suddenly. Please. Sarah froze. Oh, I can't. I'm working. When does your shift end? Deborah asked. 10 minutes. Then sit with me after, Deborah said, her voice breaking. I don't want to be alone anymore. Ruth smiled like Christmas morning. 10 minutes later, Deborah's table was no longer empty. Food was reordered. Laughter began quietly. Ruth climbed onto the chair across from Deborah as if she belonged there. And for the first time in 5 years, Deborah took a bite of her food. But not everyone was watching with warm hearts. From across the restaurant, a man in a dark suit observed the scene with narrowed eyes. His name was Saul Drummond. And what Deborah didn't know was that this Christmas miracle would soon threaten everything she had built. Because while Deborah believed she had found family again, someone else believed she had finally grown weak. And weakness in their world was unforgivable. Saul Drummond did not believe in miracles. He believed in numbers, power, control. And as he watched Deborah Hale laugh softly with a waitress and her child, something dark settled in his chest. She's slipping, he thought. And if she's slipping, the company is mine. Deborah did not notice Saul watching. She was too busy listening. For the first time in years, someone was talking to her without wanting anything. Sarah spoke carefully at first, like someone used to being invisible. Ruth, however, spoke freely, about school, about her teacher named Moses, about how she wanted to be a doctor, so nobody has to die too early. Deborah felt each word like warm light. So, what do you do? Ruth asked suddenly, crumbs on her lips. Deborah smiled. I build technology. Ruth tilted her head. Like robots. Something like that. Are you rich? Ruth asked bluntly. Sarah's face turned red. Ruth? It's okay, Deborah said gently. Yes, I'm rich. Ruth nodded, thinking hard. Then why are you sad? The question landed harder than any Saul Drummond board meeting ever had. Deborah looked at her empty glass. Because money doesn't stop people from leaving. Sarah felt that one too. They sat in silence for a moment, the good kind. Then Deborah said it, the sentence that would quietly set everything in motion. Would you like a different job, Sarah? Sarah blinked. What? I run a charitable foundation, Deborah continued. I need someone who understands struggle. Someone honest. Sarah shook her head quickly. I'm just a waitress. Deborah leaned forward. I started in a garage with one computer. Titles don't mean ability. Ruth gasped. Mommy, you could be home more. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she didn't expect. I can't accept pity, she whispered. It's not pity, Deborah said firmly. It's purpose. Across the room, Saul stood and adjusted his jacket. He had heard enough. 2 nights later, Deborah sat alone in her penthouse, staring at the city lights. The joy from Christmas had faded, replaced by pain deep in her bones. She reached for a bottle of pills, then stopped. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Hale? Sarah's voice trembled. I'll take the job, if you're serious. Deborah closed her eyes. I've never been more serious. 3 weeks later, Saul Drummond called an emergency meeting. Deborah is not well, he told the board coldly. She's making emotional decisions. No one mentioned the word cancer. No one mentioned the hospital visits. But Saul knew. And he was ready. Because Deborah Hale was about to learn that finding family can cost you everything. Deborah Hale collapsed in the hallway outside the hospital elevator. One moment she was speaking. The next, the world tilted. Sarah screamed her name. The doctors moved fast. Bright lights. Urgent voices. Cold hands lifting Deborah onto a bed. Sarah stood frozen, holding Ruth close, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Is she going to die? Ruth whispered. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Deborah woke up hours later in a quiet hospital room. The beeping of machines filled the air. Sarah was asleep in a chair beside her bed, her head tilted forward, exhaustion written across her face. Ruth lay curled beside her, clutching Deborah's old black scarf. Deborah's eyes burned with tears. I'm not alone, she thought. A doctor entered quietly. Mrs. Hale, he said gently. Your body is very tired. Deborah nodded. I know. You should not be working like this, he continued. The cancer is progressing. Sarah woke up instantly. Cancer? She repeated, her voice shaking. Deborah closed her eyes. She had hoped. She had prayed. She had delayed this moment. I wanted to tell you, Deborah whispered. I just didn't know how. Sarah stood slowly. How long? The doctor answered instead. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer, he said. We're treating it, but time is uncertain. Ruth stepped forward. Like my daddy? She asked softly. Deborah reached for her hand. Yes, sweetheart. Ruth climbed carefully onto the bed and hugged her. Then we just love you more, she said simply. That's how Mommy helped Daddy. Sarah broke down. And Deborah realized something terrifying. She didn't just fear dying. She feared leaving them. 2 days later, Saul Drummond smiled for the first time in weeks. He stood at the head of the boardroom holding a file thick with papers. Medical records confirm it, he said calmly. Deborah Hale is seriously ill. A murmur ran through the room. She's emotionally compromised, Saul continued. Hiring unqualified staff. Treating employees like family. This company cannot survive sentiment. What are you proposing? One board member asked. Saul's smile sharpened. We remove her as CEO. That evening, Deborah returned home weak but determined. Sarah wheeled her into the penthouse. I should quit, Sarah said quietly. This is my fault. Deborah's eyes flashed. No. Before Sarah could respond, Deborah's phone buzzed. An email notification. Emergency board vote, tomorrow morning. Deborah opened it. Her hands began to shake. They're trying to take everything, she whispered. Sarah knelt beside her. Then we fight, she said. Deborah looked at her. This woman who had once served tables, now standing like a wall between her and the world. I may lose, Deborah said. Sarah shook her head. You won't be alone. From the doorway Ruth listened. And for the first time, she was afraid. Because tomorrow would decide everything. Deborah's company. Sarah's future. And whether love was enough to stand against power. Chapter 4. The boardroom was colder than the hospital. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of the people inside it. 12 executives sat around a long glass table, their faces tight, serious, unreadable. Suits worth thousands of dollars. Shoes polished to mirrors. Hands folded like judges ready to pass sentence. At the head of the table stood Saul Drummond. Confident. Calm. Prepared. The door opened. Every head turned. Deborah Hale entered slowly in her wheelchair. On her right was Sarah. On her left was Rebecca, Deborah's daughter, who had flown in overnight after receiving a phone call that shook her awake. Saul's smile vanished. This is a closed meeting, Saul said sharply. Deborah met his eyes. It's my company. Silence followed. Deborah positioned herself at the table. Sarah stood behind her, hands clenched. Rebecca sat beside her mother, placing a steady hand on Deborah's arm. Saul cleared his throat. We're here because of serious concerns, he began. Concerns about leadership, judgment, and mental fitness. Rebecca stood up instantly. My mother is not weak. Saul raised a hand. Please sit. This is business. No, Rebecca said, her voice shaking with anger. This is my mother's life. Saul turned back to the board. Deborah has hired unqualified personnel to run a multi-million-dollar foundation. He looked directly at Sarah. A waitress, he said coldly. Sarah felt every eye in the room land on her. Deborah spoke before Sarah could. Her name is Sarah. Saul continued, this company was built on discipline, logic, and results, not emotion. Deborah's voice was calm. Too calm. Tell me something, Saul, she said. How many people has our foundation helped this year? Saul hesitated. That's not. Answer the question. One board member spoke. Under Sarah's leadership, 3 shelters, 2 food banks, and a job training program. Another added quietly, public approval is up. Saul's jaw tightened. This is about your health, he snapped. You are sick, Deborah. You are not thinking clearly. Deborah inhaled deeply. Yes, she said. I have cancer. Gasps filled the room. And yes, I am different now, Deborah continued. I value people more than profit. I choose compassion over control. She looked around the table. I built this company from nothing. And I almost lost everything that mattered doing it. Rebecca stood again. My mother missed my childhood because she worked for this company, she said. And now that she's finally choosing love, you want to punish her. Saul slammed his hand on the table. This is not a family meeting. Deborah's voice rose, stronger than it had been in years. It should be. She turned to Sarah. Stand up. Sarah froze. Deborah? Please. Sarah stood trembling. This woman, Deborah said, has more integrity than anyone in this room. She knows suffering. She knows need. And she leads with heart. Saul laughed sharply. Heart doesn't run corporations. No, Deborah said. But it saves them. A woman on the board, Patricia, spoke slowly. I move that we suspend this vote. Saul spun toward her. You can't be serious. Another board member nodded. Seconded. Saul looked around. Hands began to rise. One by one. Against him. The vote was taken. 10-2. Deborah remained CEO. Saul stood abruptly, his face burning red. "This is a mistake," he snapped. "And I won't be part of it." "Your resignation is accepted," Deborah said quietly. Saul stormed out. The room exhaled. Rebecca laughed through tears. Sarah covered her mouth, stunned. Deborah closed her eyes. She had won. But victory came with a cost. Later that night, back in the penthouse, Deborah's strength faded fast. Sarah helped her into bed. Rebecca stepped out to make a phone call. Deborah reached for Sarah's hand. "I'm tired," she whispered. Sarah squeezed it. "Rest. I'm here." From the doorway, Ruth watched silently, clutching a drawing she had made. She walked forward slowly. "Grandma Deborah," she asked softly, "are you going to heaven soon?" Deborah's breath caught. She looked into Ruth's eyes. And for the first time, she didn't know what to say. Deborah did not answer Ruth right away. She reached out slowly and touched the little girl's cheek. "Not yet," Deborah said softly. "But one day, yes." Ruth nodded as if she already understood something most adults never do. "Then we'll love you extra," she said. "So you don't get scared." Deborah turned her face to the side and cried quietly. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Deborah's life. And the most beautiful. The cancer treatments made her weak. Some mornings she could barely lift her hands. Other days the pain stole her breath. But she was never alone. Sarah came every day even when work was busy. She brought soup, read letters aloud, and managed the foundation with calm strength. Ruth filled the penthouse with drawings, laughter, and small questions that mattered more than board meetings ever had. And then, one evening, Deborah did something she had avoided for years. She picked up the phone and called her daughter. "Mom?" Rebecca said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" Deborah swallowed. "No, but I want it to be." Her voice broke. "I'm sorry," Deborah said. "I'm sorry I chose work over you. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I can't change the past, but I want to be better now." There was silence. Long, heavy. Then Rebecca cried. "I've waited my whole life to hear that," she whispered. They talked for hours. About hurt. About love. About everything left unsaid. 2 weeks later, Rebecca moved back to Seattle with her family. Deborah watched her grandchildren run through the penthouse halls, their laughter echoing where silence once lived. The apartment was no longer empty. It was full. Under Sarah's leadership, the foundation grew quickly. Shelters opened. Families found food. Single mothers found work. Deborah watched proudly from her wheelchair. "You were born for this," Deborah told Sarah one afternoon. Sarah smiled. "You gave me the chance." "No," Deborah said. "Ruth did." That Christmas came again. 1 year after the night Deborah had sat alone in the restaurant. This time the table was full. Rebecca, Sarah, Ruth, children, friends. Ruth climbed into Deborah's lap and handed her a drawing. It showed stick figures holding hands. In the middle was Deborah, smiling. "We're family," Ruth said simply. "Yes," Deborah whispered. "We are." 6 months later, Deborah passed away peacefully, surrounded by love. Her last words were to Ruth. "Thank you for seeing me." Years later, Sarah still ran the foundation. Rebecca remained close. Ruth grew older, still carrying crayons and kindness wherever she went. And every Christmas they told the story of a lonely billionaire, a waitress, and a little girl. A story that proved one truth. Family is not about money. It is not about power. It is about love. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth, and remember, nobody should ever be alone. Not on Christmas. Not ever.